Robert Kiyosaki had two fathers. One had a doctorate and spent his career in government education. One never finished school. The man with the doctorate died leaving bills unpaid. The man without became one of the wealthiest people in Hawaii. Welcome to Whispering Pages. If you're here just for the summary, skip to the next chapter. For the rest of us, let's ease in. Let whatever is unfinished today belong to today. Nothing needs you right now. The pre-sleep mind holds what it hears. Tonight we're with Rich Dad Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki, first published in 1997, the book that changed how a generation thinks about work, money, and financial freedom. So let's begin. Get comfortable. Close your eyes if you'd like. And let's whisper through this one together. Robert Kiyosaki grew up in Hawaii in the 1960s, one of 4 children in a Japanese-American family. His father, the man he would come to call his poor dad, was brilliant by every traditional measure. He had earned advanced degrees, completed a doctorate, and built a distinguished career in public education. By the time Robert was a teenager, his father had risen to become the superintendent of education for the state of Hawaii. He believed passionately in school, in credentials, in the safety of a good salary. He worked hard his entire life. And yet money was always a source of anxiety. He died with debt still unresolved. Robert's closest friend growing up was a boy named Mike. Mike's father had dropped out of school before finishing the 8th grade. He had no credentials, no advanced training, no letters after his name. But he was quietly building one of the largest financial portfolios in Hawaii. He owned businesses, real estate, a stake in a bank. He thought about money in a way that no classroom had ever tried to teach, and he was thriving because of it. These two men became the lens through which the whole book is written. Not as a competition. Both were honest, hardworking, and deeply caring. Both loved Robert in their own way. But the way each man understood money was entirely different. And that difference, Kiyosaki came to believe, shaped everything about the lives they each ended up living. When Robert was about 9 years old, he walked up to Mike's father and asked a direct question. Would he teach him how to get rich? Rich Dad, as Robert would always call him, agreed. But not the way Robert expected. He put both boys to work in one of his grocery stores, stacking shelves and dusting cans for 10 cents an hour. After a few weeks, he cut their pay to 5 cents. Then he stopped paying them altogether. Robert grew furious. He told Rich Dad this was unfair, possibly illegal. Rich Dad smiled. Then he explained what he was actually teaching them. Most people, he said, spend their whole lives reacting to money. They take jobs out of fear, fear of not paying rent, fear of disappointing family. They spend their raises out of desire. The bigger paycheck arrives, and the spending rises to match it. The paycheck becomes both the carrot and the cage. You run faster and faster, but the destination never changes. Rich Dad called this the rat race. The poor and the middle class, he told the boys, work for money. The rich make money work for them. That one sentence is the axis on which this entire book turns. And Kiyosaki would spend the rest of his life trying to understand, and then explain, what it actually means in practice. Part of what makes Rich Dad's teaching unusual is what he refused to do. He refused to just hand the boys answers. He wanted them to feel what most adults feel about money, the frustration, the confusion, the sense of being stuck, so that when the lesson arrived, it would land in a body that already understood the problem. He showed them something most children never see, that financial behavior is largely emotional. that adults are not rational actors when it comes to money, that the smartest, most educated people in the room often make the worst financial decisions not because they lack intelligence but because nobody ever taught them to separate their feelings about money from their thinking about it. Because it turns out to be harder than it sounds. Fear says, keep the safe job, don't take risks, stay where you are. Desire says, buy the better car, take the bigger apartment, upgrade before you've saved enough to do it. Between fear and desire, most people spend their working years. They earn more as they age. They spend more as they earn. They arrive at retirement with far less freedom than they imagined, wondering where the decades went. This is where Rich Dad Poor Dad begins. Not with a financial plan, not with an investment list, but with a question. Have you ever stopped to examine whether the financial life you're living is the one you actually chose? Lesson 1 of the book is called The Rich Don't Work for Money, but Kiyosaki is careful not to let that become a bumper sticker. The lesson is not about refusing to work. It's about what drives the decision to work, and what happens to the money that comes from it. The core insight is about the emotional engine running most people's financial decisions. Kiyosaki names it plainly, fear and desire. Not as flaws, not as things to be eliminated, but as the twin forces that, left unchecked, will quietly run your financial life without your awareness. Here is the cycle he describes. A person feels fear about money, about security, about the future. So they take a job. The job provides income, and the fear quiets. Then desire arrives. The new phone, the nicer neighborhood, the car that feels more like who they want to be. The income gets spent. The savings don't accumulate. The fear returns. More income is needed. The cycle restarts. What makes this a trap isn't the job or the spending. It is the absence of any pause for reflection. The person reacts to fear, then reacts to desire, then reacts to fear again. They are always in motion. They are almost never in observation. And so the deeper questions never get asked. Whose financial life am I actually living? Who designed this? Rich Dad's approach was different. He trained himself to notice money rather than react to it. When fear arose, he let it sharpen his thinking. He examined the situation, studied the risk, decided deliberately. When desire arose, he asked, can I channel this into building something that generates income, rather than just buying something that satisfies a feeling? This isn't about becoming cold or calculating. It's about creating a small space between the emotion and the action. In that space, Kiyosaki argues, is where financial intelligence actually lives. There is something worth sitting with here about what most of us were told. We were told, directly or indirectly, that the goal was a secure job. Finish school, get hired, work your way up, retire with something steady. This advice wasn't wrong for the world that gave it. But Kiyosaki was writing at the moment that world was beginning to change. Pensions were becoming rarer. Job security was loosening. The cost of a home, a degree, a life, all of it was rising faster than salaries. The old formula was starting to deliver different results. And so the fear of not having a job was giving way to a quieter, more persistent fear. The fear of working your whole life and still not being financially free. Of arriving at 65 and discovering that the paycheck, reliable as it was, never built the independence it promised. Kiyosaki doesn't tell you to quit your job tomorrow. He asks you to look at the paycheck honestly. Is it a tool in a larger plan? Or has the paycheck itself become the entire plan? There is a large difference. And most people, he says, have never stopped long enough to ask which one is true for them. He also names 5 obstacles that keep people from ever breaking the cycle, even when they intellectually understand the problem. The first is fear, not of poverty exactly, but of losing what they already have. People know they should invest, but the thought of losing money feels worse than the thought of never having more. So they don't act. The second is cynicism. Every time someone tries to think differently about money, there is a chorus of voices ready to explain why it won't work. The market is rigged. Real estate is too expensive. You need connections you don't have. Cynicism is cheaper than effort, and it sounds like wisdom. The third is laziness. Not the obvious kind, but the kind that disguises itself as being busy. Staying so occupied with the demands of the week that there is never a moment to ask, is this working? Am I building anything? The fourth is bad financial habits. Spending before saving. Paying everyone else before paying yourself. Treating the asset column as an afterthought. And the fifth is arrogance. The assumption that because you are successful in your career, you don't need financial education. Kiyosaki observed that many of the most financially confused people he met were also the most professionally accomplished. The confidence that served them at work became the blind spot that cost them at home. Naming these obstacles isn't meant to discourage. It is meant to make them visible. What you can see, you can choose to move through. If Lesson 1 is the philosophical foundation of Rich Dad, Poor Dad, Lesson 2 is the practical cornerstone. And it is built around a distinction so simple it almost sounds obvious, until you apply it to your own life and realize how much it changes. An asset puts money in your pocket. A liability takes money out. That is the entire framework. The rich spend their lives acquiring assets. The middle class spends its life acquiring liabilities, while genuinely believing it is acquiring assets. The poor have only expenses. And this one misunderstanding, compounding quietly over decades, sits behind most of the financial difficulty that intelligent, hard-working people experience. Kiyosaki's most famous example is the house. For generations, home ownership has been presented as the cornerstone of financial success. Your home is your most important asset. It builds equity. It appreciates. Everyone says so. Kiyosaki pushes back, firmly. He asks one question: what does an asset actually do? It puts money in your pocket. Now think about the home you live in. Every month, does it put money in your pocket? Or does it take money out? The mortgage payment, the property taxes, the insurance, the maintenance, the home you live in generates a constant outflow. It may grow in value over 20 years and sell for more than you paid. But while you are living in it, it is extracting cash from your account every single month. In Kiyosaki's definition, that makes it a liability. This was among the most debated claims in the book when it was published, and it still provokes strong reactions. Many financial advisors called it simplistic. Kiyosaki's response was that he was not telling people not to buy homes. He was telling people to understand what they are buying. When the family home is counted as the primary financial asset, planned around as though it is a retirement strategy, and nothing else is being built, that misunderstanding has consequences. The house grows in value, but it does not send a check every month. The contrast he draws is between 3 different cash flow patterns. The poor earn income that flows directly to expenses. There is no room left over. The middle class earns income, pays taxes first, and then funnels the remainder into mortgage payments, car loans, and credit card interest. Liabilities they have labeled assets. The rich earn income, direct it into assets, let those assets generate more income, and pay their expenses from that secondary stream. The gap between the middle class and the wealthy is not primarily about how much they earn. It is about what they do with what they earn, and whether they understand what they are building. The assets Kiyosaki describes are not exotic. Stocks, bonds, income-generating real estate, royalties from intellectual property, businesses that do not require your daily presence. The list is not mysterious. What is unusual is the discipline of actually building it, of treating your asset column the way most people treat their job. Something you show up for consistently, year after year, regardless of how appealing the liabilities feel in the moment. And the starting point, he says, is simply this: learn to see the difference. Can you look at your own financial life right now and draw a clear line between what is actually working for you and what is just costing you? Most people, having never been taught accounting or financial literacy in school, genuinely cannot. That is not a character flaw. It is a gap in education. And closing it, Kiyosaki argues, is the beginning of everything else. He would later create a board game called Cashflow specifically to teach this skill, not through lectures, but through the experience of making financial decisions under pressure, watching the consequences unfold, and gradually developing the instinct to tell an asset from a liability in real time. The game, he said, taught in a few hours what most people never learned in a lifetime of working. Not because the concepts are difficult, because they were never made tangible, never made personal, never made something you had to actually grapple with. The deeper point of Lesson 2 is that financial literacy is a language. Like any language, it can be learned. And like any language, the more you practice, the more natural it becomes. Kiyosaki isn't arguing that everyone needs to become a professional investor. He is arguing that everyone would benefit from being able to read their own financial statements, to understand, at any given moment, whether they are moving toward financial freedom or quietly moving away from it. Lessons 3 through 5 move from mindset and literacy into something more structural, the actual systems and strategies that the wealthy use, which most people never learn about because they are rarely taught. Lesson 3, mind your own business. This is one of Kiyosaki's most counterintuitive ideas, and it is worth unpacking carefully. Your job, he says, is not your business. Your job is someone else's business. You are supplying labor in exchange for a salary, and in doing so you are building someone else's asset column. Your business, in the financial sense, is your asset column. And most people spend 30 or 40 working years building everyone else's column while their own sits nearly empty. He is not telling people to quit. He is saying, keep the job if you need it, but treat your asset column as a second job. After expenses are covered, direct something toward real estate, or stocks, or a small side business, or intellectual property. Start building something that will generate income independent of your time. Begin small. Begin with what you have. But begin. He illustrates this with the story of Ray Kroc, the man who built McDonald's into a global enterprise. Kroc once spoke to a group of business school students and asked, "What business am I in?" They said hamburgers. He shook his head. He said he was in the real estate business. The franchise model sold hamburgers to generate cash flow that funded the acquisition of land beneath thousands of locations around the world. McDonald's became one of the largest holders of commercial real estate anywhere on earth. The hamburger was the vehicle. The land was the business. Understanding which is what Lesson 3 is about. Lesson 4 covers corporations and taxes, and this is where the book becomes genuinely structural. The core observation is about sequence. An employee earns money, pays income tax, and then spends what remains. A corporation earns money, pays legitimate business expenses, travel, equipment, research, continuing education, and then pays tax on what is left. The order is reversed. And that reversal, compounding across a lifetime of income, creates a significant difference in accumulated wealth. Kiyosaki is not suggesting anything illegal. He is pointing out that the tax code treats employees and corporations differently, and that the financially educated have historically understood and used that difference, while the financially illiterate have not known it existed. He calls the set of skills needed to navigate this your financial IQ: accounting, tax law, investment strategy, market understanding, and legal awareness. These are the tools, he says, that transform ordinary income into lasting wealth. They are almost never taught in school, and yet they are available to anyone who pursues them. Lesson 5: The rich invent money. This may be the most abstract lesson in the book until you have seen it once in practice. Financial intelligence, Kiyosaki argues, creates opportunities that the untrained eye walks right past. Two people walk through the same neighborhood, look at the same distressed property, and have completely different experiences. One sees a problem and moves on. The other sees a below-market acquisition, a motivated seller, an opportunity to add value and generate a return. The difference is not the property, it is the lens. There are two kinds of investors, he says. The first kind buys ready-made products, mutual funds, packaged investments, index funds. This is not wrong. For many people it is the right and appropriate path. The second kind creates investments. They see deals before they are obvious, structure arrangements others couldn't conceive of, and build wealth actively rather than passively. Getting to that second category requires years of education and practice. But it is available. And the book's argument is that the decision to pursue it, or not, begins with a single question. Do you believe that financial intelligence is a skill worth developing, the way you develop any other skill? Or do you believe money is something that just happens to you? Throughout all of this, Kiyosaki keeps returning to a theme that feels almost defiant. The things that matter most about money are not taught in school. Not because they are secret. Not because they are inaccessible. But because the educational system was designed to produce reliable employees, not independent wealth builders. It produced people who are skilled at working inside systems, not people who understand how those systems actually work, who owns them, and how to build one of their own. This is not a conspiracy. It is simply the result of a system optimized for a particular outcome. And understanding that it was never designed to make you financially free is the first step in deciding to design that freedom yourself. Lesson 6 is the most personal advice in the book, and it is aimed especially at people still in the early stages of their careers. Work to learn, not to earn. Kiyosaki tells a story about a young woman who attended one of his seminars. She had an advanced degree in business. She was frustrated with her salary and asked him what she should do. He suggested she take a job in sales. She was offended. She had a graduate degree. Sales felt like a step backward. He told her, "You already know how to manage. You don't know how to sell." And the ability to communicate value, to persuade clearly, to connect with someone who might say no, to explain an idea simply and compellingly, is the skill that multiplies every other skill you have. The most qualified candidate gets passed over because she can't articulate her own value. The best business idea in the world goes nowhere if its owner cannot explain it to someone who might back it. Kiyosaki spent several years working in sales at a company called Xerox. He was embarrassed by it. He already had business experience and felt the work was beneath him. But he pushed through rejection after rejection, door after door, call after call, until he became genuinely good at it. That skill, he says, changed the shape of everything that followed. The lesson is broader than sales. It is about choosing where you spend your working years with intention. Take the job that teaches you accounting even if it pays less. Take the job that exposes you to negotiation, or to real estate, or to managing people under pressure. Ask not just, how much does this pay? Ask, what will this teach me, and how much is that education worth over the next 20 years? By the end of the book, Kiyosaki offers a handful of practical invitations. Know the difference between an asset and a liability, and make a conscious, daily choice to build one and reduce the other. Pay yourself first. Before bills, before expenses, direct a portion of every paycheck into your asset column. Work toward financial literacy the way you'd work toward any other skill. One concept at a time, over years, without expecting it to happen quickly. And don't let fear run your financial decisions. Fear is information. It is not a financial advisor. When we think about books that extend what Kiyosaki is doing here, two stand out for filling specific gaps this book leaves open. The first is The Millionaire Next Door by Thomas Stanley and William Danko. Where Rich Dad Poor Dad deals in philosophy and mindset, this book is a data set. Stanley and Danko spent years surveying actual millionaires across the United States, not the obviously wealthy, but the quietly wealthy, and the picture they found is both humbling and clarifying. Most millionaires live in ordinary neighborhoods, drive used cars, and avoid the conspicuous spending most people associate with wealth. The empirical portrait of what the Kiyosaki mindset actually looks like when lived over decades. The second is I Will Teach You to Be Rich by Ramit Sethi, which fills the gap this book is honest about leaving open, what to actually do. Rich Dad Poor Dad changes how you think about money. Sethi's book tells you which accounts to open, in what order, and how to automate the process so it runs whether or not you're paying attention. If Kiyosaki is the philosophy, Sethi is the checklist. As for honest critique, the most significant challenge to this book is that its foundational stories cannot be verified. Rich Dad, Mike's father, has never been publicly identified. Kiyosaki has given contradictory answers over the years about whether he was a real person or a composite or a metaphor. The lessons may hold regardless, but the storytelling is unverifiable. The book asks you to absorb financial wisdom delivered through a narrative you cannot cross-check. The financial advice can also oversimplify. Real estate is presented as a reliable path to wealth without sufficient weight given to the risks of leverage. What happens when the market turns, when tenants stop paying, when vacancies pile up? And the book is far better at changing how you think than at telling you what to do. Readers who close it inspired but without a plan will need other books to translate the mindset into action. None of this is fatal. For what it sets out to do, shifting the frame through which a reader understands money and work, it remains one of the most widely circulated and genuinely influential personal finance books written. Engage with the ideas. Push back where they feel thin. And let the parts that land. Tonight, as you drift off, consider just one question. Look at the things in your financial life right now. Which ones are actually putting money in your pocket? and which ones are taking it out while calling themselves something else. You don't need to solve it tonight. Just let the question be there. Sleep well. And we'll see you at Whispering Pages for the next one.